varied different forms of power struggles going on throughout Roman history. Lots of kings who are very unhappy with their lot and try to rebel.
One of these rebellions was led by King Mithridates. He was one of Rome's most successful enemies.
He really gives the Romans quite some trouble.
The Roman general Pompey the Great was charged with leading a large army against King Mithridates. After a year of battle, the two forces reached the shores of the Black Sea in northern Turkey.
The Romans have the upper hand and Mithridates is retreating. What he does very cleverly, though, is he leaves in his path these pots of honey. The Romans advance, they come across what they think of as delightful little tributes from a fading enemy, eat the honey, but it turns out to be viciously toxic.
Could this honey really have been a ready-made biological weapon?
The soldiers go slightly crazy. It's as if they're high, drunk, then very agitated, and then a lot of them throw up and have diarrhea, and then they get very, very high again and kind of rush around, and this lasts for about 3 days.
Amazingly enough, the Bible itself might warn of this terrible bioweapon. Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. How can a honey become toxic? The answer lies in the rhododendron bushes that cover the hillsides of northern Turkey.
There are many examples in nature of toxins, and the rhododendron plant itself is capable of producing natural toxins.
These toxins are called terpenoids and are found in the nectar collected by the bees.
These terpenoids can become incorporated into the honey from the nectar that the bees are gathering from the rhododendron plant.
For a window into how honey intoxication by terpenoid affects the body, ancient discoveries have brought in a human guinea pig, former military officer David Shaw. He will be administered 15 fluid ounces of the terpenoid solution under medical supervision.
I'm pretty anxious, really. It's kind of a step into the unknown with this test. The side effects listed range from just mild dizziness and perspiration to vomiting and coma.
David will be overseen by Dr. Adam Cunliffe, here at the Human Performance Laboratory at the University of Westminster in central London. He will be put through a test that will push his cardiovascular system and coordination to the limit. But he will carry out this test twice, once before and once after taking the terpenoid. Dave is running at 10 miles per hour for 10 minutes. The test will measure his heart rate and oxygen consumption at low levels of activity.
Your heart rate here was 164 on average throughout that test. And we can also see your oxygen consumption, and that turned out to be about 3.8 litres per minute. And it's the oxygen which is required by the exercising muscle. So the harder you're working, the more oxygen you're going to be consuming.
Dave is in peak physical fitness, just as the Roman soldiers would have been. His test results are above average, but what effect will the terpenoid have on his body? Terpenoid is highly toxic, and Dave is only able to do this under strict medical supervision. Do not try this at home.
Really, we want to see if his performance is affected. Dave's looking a little bit unsteady on the treadmill. He's finding it difficult to keep in the centre of the track. His heart rate's about 10 beats higher per minute than it was in the previous experiment, and his respiratory exchange is quite a bit higher than it was on the previous test. His performance on the treadmill was significantly affected in a negative way. When we looked at his physiological data, we saw that he was working harder, running at the same speed. Any form of coordinated movement, as a battle would certainly involve, would be seriously affected.
I had no control over my cardiovascular system, and obviously the results show that I was greatly diminished.
In essence, we could see it as an early application of a kind of chemical or biological approach to warfare in getting the opposing forces to actually ingest this toxic substance. You could see it almost as a form of culinary Trojan horse.
So the results suggest that toxic honey would work by confusing coordination and accelerating fatigue. The 3 squadrons of Pompey's army that found and ate the honey on that fateful day in 67 BC became violently ill. That night, the sick Romans, still suffering from the effects of the toxin, were annihilated by King Mithridates' army. War drove technology to develop in biblical times. But in making weapons, did the Israelites also discover a super science that would allow objects to levitate? The Ark of the Covenant, containing the 10 Commandments of God, was said to have been able to fly. Can modern research now show that this really was possible?
Well, now the Ark is really levitating, hovering freely in the air.
The most powerful religious object in the ancient world was the Ark of the Covenant.
We call it the Mysterium e Tremendum. It is this tremendous mystery of divine power, all concentrated within a small architectural device.
It was said to be able to levitate, to bear its own weight in thin air.
It was there, moving by itself, supporting those who were carrying it.
Could this phenomena have been divine power, or is there another explanation? Could the levitation have been achieved by lost technologies, technologies that only today are being rediscovered?
Believers believe that God can do anything, and especially when it comes to the Holy Ark, which houses the 10 Commandments, given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai.
The Ark is mentioned in numerous books of the Bible, the Quran, and the Hebrew Torah. But the most mysterious story is that of Uzzah.
We know from the first book of Samuel how in the days of King David the time had come for the Ark to come back home to Jerusalem. Oxen were pulling a wagon on which the Ark was resting. Uzzah noticed that the oxen started to fall to the ground. He feared instinctively that the Ark could fall, and so he put out his hand to steady the Ark, and as soon as he did that, he dropped down dead. Why? Actually, the Ark didn't need an Uzzah or anybody else to steady it.
God said to him, Uzzah, it bears those that carry it. Can it not certainly bear itself?
God was powering that Ark forward. Yes, it was levitating through the air, with that power coming from God.
But can science offer an alternative theory? Modern scientists have uncovered a set of substances with mystical properties. They're called superconductors and could explain the miracle of levitation.
Superconductivity is one of the great frontiers in physics.
Superconductor expert Professor Tom Johansen at the University of Oslo, Norway, is investigating the phenomenon of levitation by superconductor.
I have a magnet here, and if this is in the vicinity of the superconductor, when I cool the superconductor, what is going to happen is that the superconductor recognizes that there is a magnetic field surrounding it, and it's going to react on that.
These unique properties of a superconductor create an effect called stable levitation, but they only work under very specific conditions.
There are many materials which are superconducting by itself. For instance, aluminum, lead, many elements are superconducting.
So the materials used to make superconductors were common in the ancient world.
But you have to cool them far down in order to get those properties.
Substances will only superconduct past a critical temperature. To raise this critical temperature, metals are combined into alloys.
I have here a piece of yttrium barium copper oxide, and this material has to be cooled below 91 Kelvin in order to get into the superconducting state. But this you can achieve very simply by pouring in liquid nitrogen.
91 Kelvin is equivalent to minus 296 degrees Fahrenheit.
I can take the magnet and bring it closer, but if I now put my hand back, it will stay in the air. Magnetic levitation by superconductivity.
But how can the magnet oppose the force of gravity? James Dean, a specialist in creating three-dimensional schematics, is using technology specifically designed for ancient discoveries to investigate.
When a superconductor is cooled below its critical point, the way in which electricity flows within it changes. If we take this superconductor and we place it in the presence of a magnetic field, we can see that the field lines of the magnet are inducing a flow of electric charge within the superconductor.
These currents form tornadoes of charge called vortices, with the magnetic field passing through their core.
If we zoom in and take a closer look, you can see that the vortices of current that the magnetic field has induced are passing through any little tiny defects they can find in the superconductor.
These defects pin the vortices and therefore the magnetic field in place.
If we move the magnet, we're moving the magnetic field with it, which means that the vortices are being dragged away from their pinned locations. So they're resisting this movement, and if we push it and pull it, we can see that it's trying to pop back into place. In fact, we'll find that any force which tries to move the magnet, and thus the magnetic field, will be met by an opposing force, which tries to return it to the same location.
And this is the key to stable levitation. The pinning of the magnetic field opposes the very force of gravity itself.
So the magnet is locked in place because its magnetic field is locked in place, and it levitates above the superconductor.
If the superconductor is moved, the levitating magnet will follow it, flying at the same height along a plane. So the magnet not only levitates, it can also be moved stably through the air. But could the ancient Israelites have mastered such a science more than 3,000 years ago?
Quite often when we look at ancient technology, we're amazed at the craftsmanship and the skill that goes into the production of objects.
This was an age of highly sophisticated metallurgy. War across the ancient Middle East was fueling the fires of advancement. Smelting processes were being improved to produce better alloys for weapons. While making these alloys, could the ancient Israelites have discovered this super science? If this were the case, it would not be the first lost technology puzzling historians.
Quite recently we were looking at Bronze Age spearheads, and they're amazingly fine castings, and we were trying to find a modern foundry that could replicate these. They all had great problems in achieving anything near the quality that the ancient metalworkers could do.
Was the Ark of the Covenant also levitated by a lost technology? Ancient discoveries will put this to the test. Tom has built a model of the Ark and will push stable levitation to its limits.
To levitate this ark is quite a challenge because it is a large object and it's heavy, and that I've never done before. At the bottom plate I have attached 4 very strong magnets which are going to interact with the superconductors that you are seeing here, and I have put the spacer in between so I have a gap between the ark and the superconductor when I will cool them down.
Tom pours in liquid nitrogen to cool the superconductor to minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. For the experiment to be successful, the 4 supporting blocks must be removed one by one until the ark's weight is supported only by the superconductors.
Well, now the ark is really levitating about 50 millimeters above the superconductor, hovering freely in the air. If I touch it and try to push it to the side, it will oscillate by 2 or 3 millimeters. If I really press my hand, I'm now pushing with a big force, and it's almost not moving down there. It could take much more weight.
So superconductors can cause levitation. But could ancient man really have discovered this super science 3,000 years ago?
The physics of magnetic levitation with superconductors is, of course, part of the laws of nature, and this has been like this forever. The discovery of superconductivity was totally accidental. It happens by accident even today.
But there remains a mystery. How could ancient scientists have chilled the superconductors to temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero? It is possible they didn't need to. They could have discovered materials that superconduct at room temperature.
There is no fundamental physical principle which prevents room temperature superconductivity. It could be that people have not found this material, but we cannot say today that it's impossible.
God works in different ways, and sometimes you can have an extraordinary feat from heaven. Sometimes you have something which is within the laws of nature which takes place. Both come from God. The fact that the ark could move by itself is a testament to the greatness of God.
It is not magic, but it's very fascinating physics.
Modern science often helps to substantiate details and facts that are in the Bible. There are details within modern science which are incompatible with the biblical account of events, but often, actually, modern science can be an aid to strengthen our faith and to substantiate what's in the Bible.
The mysteries of the Bible have intrigued scientists and historians for millennia, but the book also gives us clues to the ancient civilizations